A young hockey team went missing in a snowstorm, but 12 years later, a local farmer digs up something unbelievable. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The gray sky threatened snow as Jack Miller guided his excavator across the frozen ground of his property. The 45-year-old farmer squinted against the cold, his weathered face a mask of concentration. He needed to expand the barn before winter truly set in, and the forecast gave him only a few days before the first heavy snowfall. 12 years on this isolated farm had taught him to respect nature's timetable. The machine's blade bit into the earth with practiced precision. Jack had become good at this, good at the physical labor that exhausted his body enough to allow him a few hours of dreamless sleep each night. The excavator lurched suddenly, hitting something solid beneath the soil. Probably another rock, he thought, adjusting the controls to navigate around it. That's when he saw it. A flash of blue fabric unearthed by the blade, startlingly vibrant against the dark soil. Jack's hands froze on the controls. A peculiar numbness spread from his fingertips up his arms. That particular shade of blue. No, it couldn't be. His mind was playing tricks on him. It always did this time of year, as hockey season approached and the anniversary loomed. He cut the engine. The sudden silence felt oppressive, interrupted only by the distant call of a crow. With trembling legs, Jack climbed down from the excavator, his boots sinking into the soft, muddy earth as he approached what he'd uncovered. The fabric fluttered slightly in the breeze. Jack fell to his knees, ignoring the cold mud seeping through his jeans, with hands that suddenly seemed to belong to someone else. He brushed away the soil around the blue material. Each movement was hesitant, as if part of him already knew what he would find, but couldn't bear to confirm it. A memory flashed unbidden. Ryan at 14, skating backward, the determined set of his jaw as he defended the goal, his number 17 jersey a blur of blue as he moved. Jack remembered the pride that had swelled in his chest, mingled with the anxiety he always felt, watching his son in the net. Don't go easy on him, he'd always told the coaches. He needs to be ready for anything. Now, kneeling in the mud of his own property, Jack uncovered what he had feared, a hockey uniform, remarkably preserved in the clay-heavy soil. The number 17 stared back at him, as pristine as the day it had disappeared with the rest of the Blue Eagles 12 years ago. Ryan, he whispered, the name unfamiliar on his lips after years of careful avoidance. Jack clutched the uniform to his chest, the fabric cold and damp against him. Something broke inside him then, some wall he'd carefully constructed over the years. A sound escaped him, half sob, half moan, primal in its raw grief. For the first time in years, Jack Miller wept openly, rocking back and forth in the mud, holding the last tangible piece of his son. When the wave of emotion subsided enough for him to think clearly, Jack realized what this meant. If Ryan's uniform was here, preserved in the soil of his farm, what else might be buried? With renewed urgency, he began to dig with his bare hands, scraping away at the earth, not caring that his nails broke and his fingers bled. One by one, more uniforms emerged from the soil, each one perfectly preserved in the cold, oxygen-poor environment of the clay. 16 other jerseys, the entire Blue Eagles team, arranged almost ceremonially in the earth. Jack's mind raced. How had they gotten here? The bus had disappeared in the mountains, miles from his farm. None of this made sense. Among the neatly arranged uniforms, Jack's fingers brushed against something solid. He pulled it free. A waterproof notebook, sealed in plastic, with Coach Thomas Williams written on the cover in faded permanent marker. Jack opened it with shaking hands, the pages stiff but legible. The first entry described the beginning of the trip, the excitement of the boys heading to the championship. Then came entries about the accident, how the bus had skidded on black ice and plunged into an unmapped ravine. The subsequent entries documented their survival in a cave, how Coach Williams had kept the boys alive using his military training, how they'd rationed the food and melted snow for water. The sound of tires on gravel pulled Jack from his reading. Hastily, he covered the uniforms with soil and tucked the diary into his jacket. He couldn't share this yet. He needed time to process, to understand, to read every word his son might have left behind. Carl Peterson's pickup rolled into view, dust billowing behind it. Jack's neighbor, a 60-something man with perpetually sunburned skin, had been giving him space for years, respecting the invisible boundary Jack had drawn around himself after the tragedy. Today, however, Carl had apparently decided to cross that line. "Jack," Carl called, climbing out of his truck. "Brought back that chainsaw I borrowed. Works like a charm now." He approached, then stopped, noticing Jack's muddy appearance and red-rimmed eyes. "Everything okay over here?" Jack straightened, trying to compose himself. "Fine, just hit some wet soil. Makes the excavating harder." Carl nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly, unconvinced. "Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to mention that the memorial for the Blue Eagles is coming up in a few weeks, 10th anniversary of when they officially declared them." He trailed off, apparently thinking better of saying, "dead." Jack felt something snap inside him. The memorial. The annual reminder that the town had given up, declared the case closed, moved on, while he remained stuck in amber. Neither accepting nor denying, just existing in the purgatory of not knowing. And now, with the uniforms and the diary hidden, just feet away, the suggestion felt like a personal attack. "Get off my property," Jack said, his voice dangerously low. "I didn't mean—" "Get out!" Jack bellowed, advancing on Carl. "Don't you ever mention that team to me again, you understand? Never!" Carl backed away, hands raised in surrender. "I'm sorry, Jack. I shouldn't have—" "Just go," Jack said, the fight suddenly draining out of him. He turned his back on his neighbor, listening to the sound of the pickup starting up and driving away. Alone again, Jack stared at the disturbed earth. He couldn't leave the uniforms and diary exposed to the elements. With mechanical movements, he returned to the excavator and carefully reburied everything except Ryan's jersey and the coach's diary. Those he carried reverently to the barn, away from prying eyes. That night, Jack sat on a hay bale in the dimly lit barn, candles flickering around him as he turned the pages of the diary. His hands were still caked with dirt. He hadn't bothered to wash them. The candlelight cast long shadows across the weathered wood as he read about the boys' final days, their hopes of rescue dwindling as winter set in. The last pages of the diary contained something unexpected. Messages from each boy to their families, written as their situation became increasingly desperate. A lump formed in Jack's throat as he turned to the final entries, finally finding what he had both longed for and dreaded. A letter from Ryan. "Dad," it began in Ryan's careful handwriting. "I always knew why you were so hard on me during practice." Jack's heart hammered in his chest. Here it was, his son's final thoughts, his last words meant for his father. After 12 years of silence, Ryan was speaking to him across time. Before he could read further, headlights swept across the barn door, illuminating the space with harsh white light. The sound of a vehicle approaching, the crunch of tires on the frozen ground outside. Jack quickly tucked the diary under a pile of hay, his pulse racing. The vehicle outside was a police cruiser. The door opened and Jack recognized the silhouette immediately. Michael Bennett, former assistant coach of the Blue Eagles, and now the county sheriff. Michael, who had helped search for months after the disappearance. Michael, who had eventually told Jack, "You need to accept that they're gone." Michael, who now stood at the entrance of the barn, looking directly at the place where Jack had hidden the diary. Jack quickly slid the diary under the hay, feeling his heartbeat quicken as Michael's silhouette filled the barn doorway. The sheriff paused, his hand resting on his belt, eyes scanning the dimly lit space with practiced precision. "Evening, Jack," Michael said, his voice carrying an official tone that hadn't been there when he was just an assistant coach. "Got a call from Carl. Said you were acting strange, threatening him. That's not like you." Jack rose from the hay bale, brushing dried mud from his jeans. "Carl should mind his own business. I was in the middle of work. Work that has you digging in the mud with your bare hands." Michael's gaze dropped to Jack's torn fingernails and dirt-encrusted palms. "Can't say I've seen many farmers excavate that way." The tension in the barn thickened as Jack fumbled for an explanation. "Hit something with the machine. Was checking what it was." Michael took a step closer, boots crunching on the scattered hay. "And what exactly did you find, Jack?" Before Jack could answer, a sudden gust of wind rushed through the barn, powerful enough to throw the large wooden door wide open. The candles flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows across the uniforms Jack had arranged on the floor. Blue jerseys that hadn't seen daylight in 12 years, laid out with careful reverence. Michael froze, his face draining of color. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, slowly kneeling beside the nearest uniform. With trembling fingers, he touched the fabric, tracing the embroidered eagle emblem. "Where did you find these, Jack?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Jack's shoulders sagged as he realized concealment was no longer an option. "In my east field. Was expanding the barn foundation, and there they were." "All of them?" Michael's voice cracked. 17 uniforms, perfectly preserved in the clay." Michael's piercing gaze met Jack's. "Show me, now." The night air bit through Jack's flannel shirt as he led Michael to the excavation site, their way illuminated only by flashlights, casting long, distorted shadows. Neither man spoke as Jack pointed to the disturbed earth, the depression where he'd carefully reburied most of the uniforms. "They were arranged in a circle," Jack explained, his breath forming clouds in the cold air, like someone placed them there deliberately. Michael's flashlight beam trembled slightly. "And you found nothing else?" "No. Remains?" "Just the uniforms and—" Jack hesitated, the diary's existence heavy on his conscience. "And what?" Michael pressed. "Nothing. Just mud and memories." Michael studied Jack's face for a long moment before pulling out his radio. "I need to call this in. This changes everything." Back in the warmth of the barn, Jack watched helplessly as Michael photographed each uniform, carefully documenting the numbers, the state of preservation, the exact arrangement Jack had recreated. The sheriff worked methodically, professionally, but Jack didn't miss how his hands shook slightly or how he paused, eyes closed, when he came to uniform number 9, Jamie Bennett, Michael's nephew, the team's star forward. "You realize what this means," Michael said finally, looking up from his camera. "Someone moved those boys from wherever the bus crashed. Someone brought them here." "Not the boys," Jack corrected, "just their uniforms." Michael's expression hardened. "These have been on your property for 12 years, Jack. How do you explain that?" "I can't," Jack admitted, the weight of suspicion settling uncomfortably on his shoulders. "This land was wild back then, before I bought it. I've only owned it for 10 years. Dawn painted the horizon in muted pinks and grays as more vehicles arrived, patrol cars, an evidence response team van, the county coroner. Jack stood on his porch, a cup of cooling coffee clutched in his hands, watching as strangers invaded his property, sectioning off the dig site with yellow crime scene tape. "Hell of a thing," said the coroner, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, as she joined Jack on the porch. "Fabric that well preserved usually means specific soil conditions. Natural refrigeration, if you will." Jack nodded silently, his mind on the diary hidden beneath the floorboards of his bedroom, hastily relocated when it became clear the barn would be searched. By mid-morning, news vans lined the road to Jack's farm, reporters shouting questions as technicians in white coveralls carefully excavated the area. Jack retreated inside, unplugging his landline after the fifth call from a family member of the Blue Eagles. "Mr. Miller," a young forensic technician called through the screen door, "Sheriff Bennett would like you to show us exactly how you found the uniforms. For the record." Jack reluctantly followed the woman to the dig site, now transformed into a scientific excavation with grid lines and numbered markers. Michael stood to one side, his face unreadable. "Walk us through it," he instructed. "Step by step." Jack described hitting the obstruction with the excavator, seeing the blue fabric, digging with his hands. The technicians exchanged glances at this last detail. "You disturbed a potential crime scene before notifying authorities?" one asked pointedly. "I didn't know what it was," Jack defended himself. I don't know what I thought." "And you're certain you found nothing else? No personal effects, papers, identification?" The female technician's eyes bore into him. Jack felt Michael's intense gaze. "Like I said, just the uniforms, perfectly preserved." "Interesting that you removed only your son's uniform before reburying the others," Michael observed. "Why not take them all?" The accusation in his tone wasn't subtle. Jack clenched his jaw. "I wasn't thinking clearly. It was Ryan's. Wouldn't you have done the same with Jamie's?" Michael's face darkened, but he turned away without responding. Late that afternoon, as the day's activity wound down and most of the technicians packed their equipment, Jack retreated to his kitchen. The house felt different now, as if the discovery had shifted something fundamental about the space he'd inhabited for a decade. He stared at the telephone, its disconnected cord a symbol of his continued isolation. The message light on his answering machine blinked relentlessly. 17 new messages. The number couldn't be coincidence. Hesitantly, Jack reconnected the line and pressed play. "Jack, it's Mary Parker, Jason's mother. Please call us when—" "This is Thomas Anderson. My son Eric was number—" "Miller, it's Richard Gonzalez. If what they're saying is true—" Jack pressed stop, unable to face the desperate hope and demand in those voices. Families who, like him, had lived in limbo for 12 years, never fully accepting that their boys were gone. Families who deserved answers he couldn't provide without revealing the diary. A knock at the back door startled him. Michael stood there, his official demeanor slightly softened. "We're wrapping up for today," he said when Jack opened the door. "Ground-penetrating radar shows nothing else buried there. Just the uniforms." Jack nodded, relieved. "But I need to ask you directly, Jack," Michael continued, his voice dropping. "Did you find anything else? Anything at all? Because if you're withholding evidence—" "I told you everything," Jack lied, the weight of the diary hidden upstairs pressing on him like a physical burden. "We'll have the full forensics team back tomorrow," Michael warned. "They'll go over every inch of that field." After Michael left, Jack retrieved the diary from its hiding place, settling into his worn armchair to continue reading by lamplight. The coach's detailed account of their survival efforts was meticulous. How they'd rationed food, treated injuries, maintained hope as days stretched into weeks. The last third of the diary contained the boys' messages to their families. Some were brief, others several pages. Jack's finger trembled as he turned to Ryan's letter, reading beyond the first line this time. "Dad, I always knew why you were so hard on me during practice. You wanted me to be strong enough to face anything. Guess that paid off here, huh? Coach says we need to conserve energy, but I keep doing those mental drills you taught me." A soft knock interrupted his reading. Jack hastily tucked the diary under a cushion before answering the door. Sarah Williams stood in the gentle rainfall, her thin frame dwarfed by an oversized raincoat. The coach's widow looked older than her 50 years, grief having carved permanent lines around her eyes and mouth. "Jack," she said softly, "I had to come. I've been watching the news." "Sarah, Jack faltered, unsure what to say to this woman he'd avoided for years, just as he'd avoided everyone connected to the Blue Eagles. They're saying you found their uniforms. Thomas's team. Her voice quavered. Is it true? Jack nodded, stepping back to let her in from the rain. Was there anything else? Her eyes, so much like her husband's, searched his face. Anything of Thomas's? A watch, a ring, anything at all? The diary's presence seemed to pulse from its hiding place, calling out to this woman who deserved to read her husband's final thoughts. Jack's conscience warred with his selfish desire to keep Ryan's words private. Please, Jack, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. If you found anything written by my husband, I need to see it. Those would be his last words to me. Jack hesitated in the doorway, the weight of Sarah's plea hanging between them. Her rain-soaked figure seemed so fragile, yet there was a determination in her eyes that he recognized, the same stubborn resilience he'd seen in the mirror for 12 years. With a reluctant nod, he stepped aside, ushering her into the dimly lit kitchen. You should dry off, he mumbled, retrieving a threadbare towel from a drawer. As Sarah patted her face dry, Jack's mind raced. He couldn't show her the entire diary. Ryan's words were his alone, but could he really deny this woman her husband's final thoughts? I'll make some tea, he said, buying time as he filled the kettle. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. When the tea was ready, Jack led Sarah to the small table by the window. Rain drummed steadily on the roof as he disappeared into the living room, returning moments later with several carefully separated pages. Thomas wrote this, Jack said, placing the coach's entries before her, deliberately withholding the pages containing the boys' letters. It's what I found with the uniforms. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the pages. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled silently down her cheeks as she read her husband's meticulous account of their survival efforts, how he'd organized the boys into teams, rationed their snacks, melted snow for water, and maintained discipline through sing-alongs and hockey strategy sessions. He never gave up, she whispered, tracing his handwriting with her fingertip. Even at the end, he was still... Jack looked away, unable to bear the raw grief in her expression. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too intimate for this moment he'd thrust himself into. Sarah turned another page, then stopped, her brow furrowing. There's something wrong here, she said, flipping to the next sheet. The numbering jumps. Page 14 to 22. Her eyes lifted to Jack's, sudden understanding. Dawning. There are pages missing. Jack shifted uncomfortably. That's all I found, he lied. Sarah's expression hardened. Don't insult me, Jack. I can see the torn edges where you've removed pages. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum. What are you hiding? What did Thomas write that you don't want me to see? It's not what Thomas wrote, Jack admitted, his voice low. It's what the boys wrote, at the end. The boys? Sarah's voice caught. They left messages. Jack nodded reluctantly. For their families. Thomas gave them his remaining pages. Each boy wrote something. And you're keeping them from us? The hurt in Sarah's voice shifted to anger. Those aren't yours to keep, Jack. What about the other families? Don't they deserve to read their son's last words? I need time, Jack protested, rising to face her. I haven't even finished reading Ryan's message myself. Can't you understand that? What I understand, Sarah said, her voice rising, is that you're being selfish, just like you've always been, shutting yourself away on this farm while the rest of us tried to heal together. She gathered the pages, clutching them to her chest. I'm taking Thomas's entries. The rest will come out, Jack. I'll make sure of it. You'll be hearing from my attorney. This is withholding evidence. The screen door slammed behind her as she stormed into the rain, leaving Jack alone with his guilt and the remaining pages of the diary. He sank back into his chair, exhaustion washing over him. Perhaps Sarah was right. Perhaps he was being selfish. But these were Ryan's final words, possibly the last connection he would ever have to his son. The jarring ring of the telephone sliced through his thoughts. Jack stared at it, having forgotten he'd reconnected the line. After 4 rings, he reluctantly lifted the receiver. "Jack, it's Emily." The sound of his ex-wife's voice after so many years sent a jolt through him. Emily, who had left Lakefield 8 years ago, unable to bear the constant reminders of their lost son. Emily, who had divorced him when his grief turned to obsession and isolation. "I saw the news," she continued when he didn't respond. "About the uniforms. Is it really—" "Yes," Jack managed. "It's them. Ryan's was there." A silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken grief. "I'm staying at the Lakeview Hotel," Emily finally said. "I flew in this morning when I heard." Jack gripped the phone tighter, picturing her in the small hotel overlooking the frozen lake where Ryan had learned to skate. "Why now?" he asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "You left. Started a new life." "He was my son too, Jack." Her voice hardened. "Don't you dare suggest otherwise." Jack closed his eyes, regret washing over him. "I'm sorry. It's been a long day." "Did they find anything else?" Emily asked cautiously. "Anything of Ryan's? Personal effects, or—" Jack's gaze drifted to the remaining diary pages hidden under the cushion. The selfish impulse rose again, to keep Ryan's words for himself, to maintain this one tenuous connection. "No," he lied. "Just the uniforms. Nothing personal." A pause. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Jack said firmly, hating himself for the deception but unable to share even with her. "Listen, Emily, I need to go. The police will be back tomorrow." After hanging up, Jack wandered through the empty house, pausing at the door to Ryan's untouched bedroom. For years, he'd kept it exactly as it had been. Hockey trophies lining the shelves, posters of NHL goalies on the walls, the blue bedspread Ryan had insisted matched the team colors. A shrine to a life interrupted. Jack opened the door, dust particles dancing in the beam of hallway light. The room smelled stale, unlived in. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the familiar creak of springs a ghost of memory. Emily's voice echoed in his mind, accusatory. He was my son, too. Late that night, Jack was startled awake by a noise from the direction of the barn. He sat up in bed, listening intently. There it was again, a distinct thud, followed by the sound of something scraping against wood. Grabbing a baseball bat from beside his bed, Jack pulled on boots and moved silently through the house. The night air bit through his thin t-shirt as he crossed the yard, guided only by moonlight and memory. As he approached the barn, he could see light seeping from beneath the door. Someone was inside with a flashlight. Jack eased the door open, bat raised. A figure hunched over the pile of hay where he'd originally hidden the diary was illuminated by the beam of a small flashlight. "Don't move," Jack commanded, his voice startling the intruder, who spun around with a gasp. Jason Parker, father of defenseman Mark Parker, stood clutching one of the Blue Eagles jerseys. His face, thinner and more lined than Jack remembered, was a mask of desperate hope and fury. "Where is it, Miller?" Jason demanded, his voice breaking. "Sarah said there were letters. Where's my son's letter?" Jack lowered the bat slightly. "You broke into my property in the middle of the night." 12 years, Jason shouted, advancing on Jack. 12 years we've had nothing. No closure, no answers. And now you're hoarding their last words? What kind of monster are you? "I need time," Jack repeated the same weak excuse he'd given Sarah. "Time?" Jason laughed bitterly. "We've had nothing but time, watching our lives crumble while you hid away on this farm." He lunged, suddenly grabbing Jack's shirt. "Where's the diary, Miller?" In the struggle that followed, Jack's bat clattered to the floor as both men grappled for control. Jason, fueled by grief and rage, slammed Jack against the barn wall, hay and dust billowing around them. Jack pushed back, and they crashed into a workbench, sending tools and papers flying. "Stop!" Jack shouted as Jason's fist connected with his jaw. This isn't helping anyone." Jason paused, breathing heavily, his gaze falling on several pages that had scattered across the floor, pages Jack had brought to the barn to read in private after Sarah's departure. Before Jack could react, Jason scooped up a handful of the pages and backed toward the door. "You don't deserve to keep these," he said, clutching the papers like treasures. "They belong to all of us." "Give those back." Jack lunged forward, but Jason was already bolting through the door into the darkness. Jack pursued him across the moonlit yard, but Jason's desperation made him faster. By the time Jack reached the edge of his property, Jason's truck was already starting up, headlights flaring to life as he sped away down the rural road. Defeated, Jack trudged back to the barn to assess the damage. The pages Jason had taken, how many were there? Whose messages had he stolen? Jack frantically gathered the remaining sheets, trying to organize them, heart sinking as he realized the truth. Ryan's letter was missing. Outside in his truck, parked just beyond the reach of Jack's property lights, Jason Parker held the stolen pages up to his dashboard light. His hands trembled as he searched for his son's handwriting among the papers, hope warring with dread. What he found instead was a letter in different handwriting, addressed to Dad. Jason's breath caught as he realized what he held. Not his own son's final message, but Ryan Miller's last words to Jack. The next morning, Jack found Jason's truck parked at the end of his driveway. The man himself stood beside it, shoulders slumped, Ryan's letter clutched in his hand. Jack approached cautiously, muscles tensed for another confrontation, but Jason's posture held none of last night's rage. "I shouldn't have taken this," Jason said without preamble, extending the crumpled pages toward Jack. "It wasn't mine to read." Jack accepted the letter, carefully smoothing the creases. "Did you—" "I read it," Jason admitted, his eyes downcast. "I was looking for Mark's words, but—" He gestured, helplessly at the pages. "Your boy loved you, Jack, even at the end." The admission hung between them, uncomfortable and raw. Jack tucked Ryan's letter into his pocket, unsure how to respond. "I told the others," Jason continued, not meeting Jack's gaze, "about the letters. The families have a right to know." Before Jack could respond, a county sheriff's vehicle pulled up beside them. A deputy stepped out, holding an official-looking envelope. "Jack Miller?" the deputy asked, though he clearly knew who Jack was. "This is for you. Court appearance tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp." The cold weight of the envelope seemed to contain far more than just paper as Jack accepted it. The deputy nodded briefly before returning to his vehicle, leaving Jack and Jason in uneasy silence. "What will you do?" Jason asked quietly. Jack stared at the sealed envelope. "I don't know." By noon, Jack sat in the nearly empty courtroom, uncomfortably aware of his mud-stained work boots and 3-day stubble. His court-appointed attorney, a disinterested young man named Lester, who smelled of cigarettes and cheap aftershave, shuffled papers beside him. "Honestly, Mr. Miller," Lester whispered, "I don't understand why you're fighting this. These families have waited 12 years. What difference does another few days make to you?" Jack had no answer that didn't sound selfish even to his own ears. Across the aisle, the gallery filled with families of the Blue Eagles, parents, siblings, grandparents, all casting accusatory glances in his direction. He recognized faces he'd avoided for over a decade. The Andersons with their perpetually tear-reddened eyes, the Gonzalez family clustered together like a fortress, Sarah Williams sitting alone near the front. Emily slipped into the courtroom just as proceedings began, taking a seat at the very back. She'd aged well, Jack noted distantly, her blonde hair now shorter, professional. She didn't acknowledge him. Judge Martha Harmon, a severe woman with silver-framed glasses, studied the documents before her with a frown. "Mr. Miller," she began, peering over her glasses, "you've been accused of withholding evidence in a missing persons case, Do you understand the seriousness of these charges? Yes, Your Honor, Jack answered, his voice hoarse. The families of the Blue Eagles hockey team are petitioning for immediate surrender of all materials found on your property, specifically a diary allegedly written by Coach Thomas Williams and the team members. Judge Harmon fixed Jack with a penetrating stare. What exactly is your objection to turning over these materials? Jack cleared his throat. I need time, Your Honor, to process. Process? Sarah Williams stood suddenly from her seat. My husband's been dead for 12 years. We've all been processing while you've been hiding away on that farm. Mrs. Williams, please, the judge admonished, though her tone held sympathy. She turned back to Jack. Mr. Miller, I understand these materials may have personal significance to you, but they are potential evidence in an ongoing investigation. More importantly, they contain what may be the final communications of 16 other sons to their families. Jack stared at his hands, unable to meet the collective grief of the room. I will give you 72 hours, Judge Harmon declared finally. 3 days to turn over all materials to the Sheriff's Department. After that, Mr. Miller, I will have no choice but to charge you with obstruction of justice. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Jack managed, aware of the disappointed murmurs rippling through the gallery. Court adjourned, the judge announced, her gavel striking with finality. As Jack gathered his coat, Emily approached, her expression unreadable. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. I just need time. No, Jack, Emily cut him off. You've had 12 years of time, 12 years of shutting everyone out, including me. Don't make the same mistake again. She turned to leave, then hesitated. I'm staying through the weekend. If you want to talk, really talk, you know where to find me. The drive back to the farm felt longer than usual, each familiar landmark somehow altered by the weight of the court's decision. 3 days. What difference would 3 days make? Yet Jack couldn't bring himself to surrender the diary just yet. Not when he still hadn't fully read Ryan's words, hadn't prepared himself for sharing that final piece of his son. As Jack turned into his driveway, he noticed immediately that something was wrong. The front door stood slightly ajar, swinging gently in the afternoon breeze. He was certain he'd locked it before leaving for court. Inside, chaos greeted him. Drawers pulled out and emptied, furniture overturned, Ryan's hockey trophies scattered across the floor. Someone had methodically torn apart his home, searching for something. The diary, undoubtedly. Jack rushed to his bedroom, heart hammering. The floorboard where he'd hidden the remaining pages was pried up, the space beneath empty. A white envelope lay conspicuously on his pillow. With trembling fingers, Jack opened it, unfolding a single note. We know you're hiding more than the diary. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the message cryptic. Who would have broken in? One of the families, desperate for answers. Michael, suspicious that Jack was withholding evidence about the accident. Jack sank onto the edge of his bed, mind racing. The diary pages were safe, hidden in the false bottom of a feed bin in the stable, a hiding place dating back to the property's rumored history as a Prohibition-era storage site. The sound of tires on gravel sent him to the window. Michael Bennett's cruiser pulled up outside, the sheriff stepping out with purposeful strides. Jack quickly tucked the note into his pocket before opening the door. Decided to save me the trouble of serving these papers? Michael asked, holding up a document identical to the one Jack had received earlier. I've already been to court, Jack replied wearily. Michael nodded. I know. 3 days. He glanced past Jack at the ransacked living room. What happened here? Break-in, Jack said flatly. Looking for the diary, I'd guess. Michael's expression darkened as he stepped inside, surveying the damage with a professional eye. You report it? Just got home and found it this way. Convenient timing, Michael observed, his tone neutral but his meaning clear. I'll have a deputy come take a report. though I imagine the easiest way to stop this would be to turn over the diary. After Michael left, Jack drove to the hardware store purchasing motion-activated cameras, new locks, and a small safe. If someone was desperate enough to break into his home, they might return, and next time they might find what they were looking for. That evening, Jack installed the cameras at strategic points around the property, rigged a rudimentary alarm system, and transferred the diary pages from the feed bin to the new safe, which he then concealed in the stable's tack room. As he handled the pages, he realized he'd been avoiding finishing Ryan's letter, afraid perhaps of reaching its end and having truly nothing more of his son. Sitting in the stable by lantern light, surrounded by the comforting sounds and smells of the horses, Jack finally opened Ryan's letter completely. His son's neat handwriting filled several pages, describing their ordeal in the cave, how Coach Williams had kept their spirits up, how the older boys had looked after the younger ones. Ryan wrote about being scared, but trying to stay brave, about using the mental exercises Jack had taught him to stay calm when panic threatened. Then came the part Jack had dreaded. "Dad, I need you to know that I understand now why you pushed me so hard. You knew life could be tough, and you wanted me to be tougher. I used to get so mad when you'd make me do extra drills or stay late at the rink. But those lessons are keeping me alive now. Coach says we're running out of options, but I'm not giving up. If I don't make it back, please don't shut down. Mom needs you. You need each other. Your love was always the foundation of everything good in my life, even when you guys fought. Please find your way back to each other. That's what I want more than anything." Jack's vision blurred with tears as he read the final lines. "I love you, Dad. I'm not scared anymore. Whatever happens, I know you'll keep me alive in your heart. Just don't live there alone, okay?" The dam that had held back 12 years of grief finally broke. Jack wept openly, clutching the pages to his chest, his son's final plea echoing in his mind. Don't live there alone. Yet that was exactly what he had done. Buried himself in isolation, pushed away Emily, rejected the community that shared his loss. Hours later, dry-eyed and exhausted, Jack made a decision. Taking his old hockey skates from their dusty case, he drove to the Lakefield Community Rink, abandoned years ago when the new sports complex was built on the other side of town. The neglected building stood like a ghost in the moonlight, its windows boarded, the once proud sign faded to illegibility. Jack forced open a side door, the hinges protesting with a screech that echoed through the empty space. Inside, the rink lay in shadow, moonlight filtering through gaps in the roof to illuminate the cracked, uneven ice that had formed naturally from years of leaking rainwater. For the first time in 12 years, Jack laced up his skates, the familiar motion bringing a flood of memories, teaching Ryan to skate at 3, practicing shots together every weekend, the look of pure joy on his son's face when he made his first save as a goalie. Jack stepped onto the rough ice, blades scraping across the uneven surface. He pushed off, gliding shakily at first, then with increasing confidence as muscle memory took over. Alone in the abandoned rink, Jack moved through the darkness, the moonlight catching his tears as they fell silently onto the ice. He didn't notice the figures emerging from the shadows until they had completely surrounded him, a group of men standing at the edge of the rink, their faces contorted with anger in the dim light. The fathers of the Blue Eagles had found him. "He says you were hard on him in practice because you loved him." Jason's voice echoed through the empty arena as he stepped forward, revealing the content of Ryan's letter to the group. "While my son died freezing in that cave without a single word of comfort from his father." Jason's accusation hit Jack like a physical blow, reverberating through the empty arena. The surrounding fathers closed in, their faces hardened by years of grief, now twisted with fresh anger. Jack backed away, his skates scraping across the rough ice. "You had no right to read that letter," Jack said, his voice unsteady. "Those were Ryan's private words to me." "Private?" Another father stepped forward, Tom Gonzalez, whose son had been the team's backup goalie. "You're talking about privacy while you hoard all of our son's last words." Jack raised his hands defensively as the men advanced across the ice, some slipping in their street shoes, but determination driving them forward. Tom reached him first, shoving him hard against the crumbling boards. The rotted wood cracked under the impact, sending splinters flying. 12 years, Tom hissed, his face inches from Jack's. 12 years we've had nothing but questions. No answers, no closure, not even bodies to bury. And you find their final messages and keep them for yourself? Jack tried to push back, but another father grabbed him from behind. "I just needed time." "Time?" Jason barked a bitter laugh. "My wife hasn't slept through the night in 12 years. She wakes up screaming Mark's name. What the hell do you know about time?" The first punch caught Jack by surprise, knuckles connecting with his cheekbone in an explosion of pain. He tasted blood as his head snapped to the side. He didn't fight back. Some part of him felt he deserved this, had earned their rage through his selfishness. Another blow landed, then another. Jack slumped against the boards as the men unleashed 12 years of helpless anger. Through the ringing in his ears, he barely registered the sudden wail of police sirens outside, the flash of blue and red lights through the broken windows. "Police! Break it up!" Sheriff Michael Bennett's authoritative voice cut through the chaos as he strode into the rink, hand on his holstered weapon. 2 deputies flanked him, moving swiftly to separate the men. Jack slid down to a sitting position on the ice, wiping blood from his split lip. Michael knelt beside him, his expression unreadable. "Can you stand?" the sheriff asked quietly. Jack nodded, allowing Michael to help him to his feet. The fathers stood in a loose semicircle, held back by the deputies, but still radiating fury. "You're protecting him?" Jason demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at Michael. "After what he's done?" Michael's jaw tightened. "What I'm doing is preventing you all from adding assault charges to your problems." He turned to Jack. "Let's go. I'm taking you home." Outside, Michael guided Jack to the passenger side of his cruiser. The collected fathers watched silently as the sheriff helped Jack inside, then rounded the vehicle to the driver's seat. No one spoke as Michael started the engine and pulled away from the abandoned rink. The silence in the cruiser was oppressive, broken only by Jack's labored breathing and the occasional crackle of the police radio. Jack stared out the window, watching the familiar landmarks of Lakefield pass by, the high school where Ryan had attended for barely a semester, the diner where they'd celebrated wins, the park where he'd taught his son to throw a baseball. "They could have killed you," Michael said finally. "Maybe I would have let them," Jack replied, his voice hollow. Michael glanced at him sharply before returning his eyes to the road. After a moment, Jack realized they weren't heading toward his farm. The sheriff had turned onto the lake road, away from town. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, sudden unease prickling at the back of his neck. Michael didn't answer immediately. He drove past the last streetlight, plunging them into darkness broken only by the cruiser's headlights and the 3/4 moon reflecting off the frozen lake. Finally, he pulled into a viewpoint overlooking the water and cut the engine. In the sudden silence, Michael stared straight ahead, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. "I read it," he said at last. "Read what?" Jack asked, though he already knew. "The diary." Michael turned to face him, moonlight carving deep shadows into his features. "When I came to your barn that first night, while you were showing me where you found the uniforms, I saw the corner of it sticking out from the hay." Jack's heart hammered in his chest. "You had no right—" "And you do?" Michael shot back. "Those pages contained evidence about the crash, Jack. Evidence that I couldn't let come to light." The implication of Michael's words took a moment to register. "What are you talking about?" Michael's shoulders slumped slightly, the official facade cracking to reveal something vulnerable beneath. "There were entries about the bus, problems with the brakes that Thomas had reported before the trip." "And?" Jack prompted. a chill spreading through him that had nothing to do with the winter night. "And I was the one who signed off on the maintenance checks," Michael said quietly. "I was working part-time at the district's vehicle maintenance garage back then, between coaching and police academy. We were understaffed, behind schedule. I rushed the inspection." Jack stared at the man beside him. This person he'd known for years. First as Ryan's assistant coach, then as the deputy who'd led search parties, and finally as the sheriff who'd told them all to accept that the boys were gone. In the harsh shadows of the cruiser's interior, Michael looked suddenly older, burdened. "You knew," Jack breathed, the pieces falling into place. "You knew the bus might have had mechanical problems and you covered it up." "I didn't know for certain," Michael countered, a defensive edge entering his voice. "Thomas had complained about the brakes feeling soft, but half the coaches complained about something or other. We were operating on a shoestring budget. I checked what I could and signed off. And then they disappeared," Jack said, old rage beginning to simmer beneath his shock. "And you said nothing." Michael's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "What good would it have done? Would it have brought the boys back? Or would it just have destroyed more lives, mine, my family's?" "The families deserve to know." Jack's voice rose sharply. "Like you're telling them about the diary?" Michael shot back. "We all have our secrets, Jack. Things we keep to protect ourselves." He drew a deep breath. "That's why I tore out those pages before putting the diary back. No one needs to know about the maintenance issues. It doesn't change what happened." The revelation struck Jack like another physical blow. "You destroyed evidence." "I preserved peace," Michael insisted. "This town has suffered enough." He turned to Jack, his expression hardening. "So here's what happens now. You turn over the diary, what's left of it, as ordered by the court. Everyone gets closure from their son's final messages. The case remains what it always was. A tragic accident in bad weather. And we both keep our secrets." Jack stared at the moonlight reflecting off the frozen lake, the same lake where Ryan had learned to skate, where Jack had taught him to get back up after every fall. Ryan's words echoed in his mind. "Don't live there alone." "No," Jack said quietly but firmly. "No?" Michael's voice held a dangerous edge. "Those families deserve the whole truth, not just their sons' goodbyes, but why they were saying goodbye in the first place." Jack turned to face the sheriff. "If the bus had been properly maintained, you have no proof," Michael cut in. "It's your word against mine, and I'm the sheriff. Who do you think people will believe? The recluse who hoarded evidence for days? The man who's been hiding from reality for 12 years? Jack held Michael's gaze. Maybe. Or maybe the truth has a way of coming out. Michael's expression darkened. "Be careful, Jack. Think about what you're doing. Think about what this would do to the town, to those families who've just started to heal." "Heal?" Jack gave a bitter laugh. "Is that what you think they've done? Those men at the rink weren't healing. They were drowning, just like I've been." He reached for the door handle. "Take me home. I've got decisions to make." The drive back to Jack's farm passed in tense silence. As they pulled into the driveway, Jack noticed the lights of his barn were on, although he was certain he'd turned them off before leaving for the rink. "Looks like you've got company," Michael observed, his tone carefully neutral. Jack squinted through the windshield. "I installed security cameras earlier. Nobody should be in there." Michael's hand moved automatically to his sidearm as they both exited the vehicle. They approached the barn cautiously, Michael taking the lead as they neared the partially open door. "Sheriff's Department," Michael called out. "Whoever's in there, come out slowly." No response came from within the illuminated barn. Michael drew his weapon, signaling for Jack to stay behind him as he pushed the door wider. The barn appeared empty at first glance, tools and equipment undisturbed. Then Jack noticed the open feed bin, the original hiding place of the diary. "Someone's been searching," Jack muttered, moving toward the tack room where he'd relocated the safe. As Jack entered the tack room, his blood ran cold. The newly installed safe stood open, its contents emptied. The diary pages were gone. "Michael," he called, turning back toward the main area, only to find himself staring down the barrel of the sheriff's gun. "I'm sorry, Jack," Michael said softly, genuine regret in his eyes. "I can't let you ruin everything I've built. I can't let you destroy this town with a truth no one needs to know." Jack stared at the sheriff's gun with disbelief. "Michael, what are you doing?" "Protecting everyone, including you," Michael replied, his weapon steady. "Walk back to the cruiser. We're going to have a longer conversation." The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted whatever Michael had planned. Headlights swept across the barn entrance as 2 patrol cars pulled up. Michael quickly holstered his weapon, his face transforming into the professional mask of the county sheriff. Jack saw his opportunity evaporate as deputies approached. "Sheriff," Deputy Collins called out, "got your message about a break-in at Miller's property." Michael nodded smoothly. "Just checking the scene now. Mr. Miller will file a full report about your stolen property." His eyes held a clear warning. "Let's head to the station." 3 hours later, Jack sat in a small interrogation room, his split lip and bruised face throbbing. The formal charges had been read: obstruction of justice, withholding evidence, and now a monitoring bracelet secured around his ankle. House arrest until his court date. The judge was lenient considering the circumstances, said the public defender assigned to his case, a tired-looking woman who'd barely glanced at his file. "You can thank Sheriff Bennett for requesting home confinement instead of county jail." Jack felt the cold weight of the monitoring device. Michael had outmaneuvered him completely. Now he was trapped at his farm, isolated, while the sheriff controlled the narrative and the evidence. The drive home in a patrol car was silent, Jack watching familiar landscapes pass by. When they pulled up to his farmhouse, now dark and unwelcoming, the deputy gave him a curt reminder. 500 feet. That's your perimeter. Step beyond that, and we'll know immediately." Inside his ransacked home, Jack stood motionless in the darkness. The silence pressed against him, more oppressive than it had ever been in 12 years of self-imposed isolation. He flicked on a light, surveying the destruction from the earlier break-in, or had it been Michael himself, searching for the diary before Jack had moved it. Jack moved through the rooms methodically, straightening furniture, picking up Ryan's scattered hockey trophies with reverential care. Each room felt like a time capsule, preserving his grief rather than his memories. Dust-covered surfaces, books remained unread on shelves, bills and mail had accumulated in neglected piles. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty house. He found himself standing in the doorway of Ryan's bedroom again. Nothing had been touched here. Whoever had searched the house had respected this one boundary. Or perhaps they recognized, as Jack did now, the unhealthy shrine it had become. Jack entered the room fully, opening the curtains to let moonlight spill across the faded blue comforter. Ryan's hockey poster, signed by his idol, the legendary goaltender Patrick Roy, hung slightly crooked on the wall. Jack straightened it, fingers lingering on the frame. "I've been living in the past," he said quietly to the empty room. "You asked me not to, and I didn't listen." The night stretched endlessly before him. Sleep impossible, with the weight of realization pressing down. Jack climbed to the attic, pulling the chain on a single bare bulb. Cardboard boxes labeled in Emily's neat handwriting lined the walls. Christmas, summer photos, Ryan's early years. Jack pulled down a box marked Blue Eagles, newspaper. Inside were dozens of carefully preserved newspaper clippings about the team's disappearance, the search efforts, the eventual memorial service when the case was officially closed. He spread them across the dusty attic floor, reading each one as if for the first time. The earliest articles described the bus departing Lakefield for the championship game in Millerville. Weather reports mentioned unexpected snow, but nothing severe. Later pieces detailed the growing search when the bus failed to arrive and didn't respond to radio calls. Jack noticed the bylines, many written by Rebecca Collins, the local reporter who'd followed the case obsessively until taking a job with a larger newspaper 2 years after the disappearance. Jack paused at an article from 3 weeks after the bus vanished. It quoted Michael Bennett, then a deputy. "We've expanded the search area to include previously unmapped logging roads in the northern sector." But in the next week's paper, the search area had shifted south instead, with no explanation for the change. The timeline began to crystallize in Jack's mind. According to the diary, the team had survived for weeks after the crash, but the search had shifted away from the area where they might have been found. Had Michael deliberately misdirected the search efforts after realizing his negligence might be discovered? Jack pinned the articles to his bedroom wall, connecting them with pieces of string like a detective's investigation board. He added notes from memory about what he'd read in the diary, creating a visual timeline of events. The more he worked, the more convinced he became that Michael had manipulated the investigation from the beginning. Around dawn, Jack heard a vehicle approaching. He tensed, expecting Michael or his deputies, but through the window recognized Carl Peterson's old pickup. His neighbor trudged up the porch steps, a grocery bag in one hand. "Figured you might need supplies," Carl said when Jack opened the door. "Heard about the house arrest from Doris at the diner." Jack stepped aside to let him in. "News travels fast." "Small town," Carl replied with a shrug, setting the groceries on the kitchen counter. His eyes widened at Jack's bruised face. "Looks like you ran into some trouble." "The other fathers found me at the old rink." Jack filled a kettle for coffee. "Can't say I blame them." Carl nodded slowly, taking in the investigation wall Jack had created. "What's all this?" Jack hesitated before deciding to trust his neighbor. "I think there's more to the story of what happened to the Blue Eagles. The sheriff might have covered up evidence about the bus having mechanical problems he should have fixed." "Jesus," Carl breathed, approaching the wall of articles. "You have proof?" "I did in the diary, but it's gone now, stolen from my barn last night." Jack poured them both coffee. "Michael was the one who signed off on the bus inspection. He admitted it to me." Carl's expression darkened. "You know, Mark mentioned something about the bus." "Mark? Your nephew?" Jack set his mug down, suddenly alert. Carl nodded. "Before that last trip, said the driver had been complaining that the brakes felt soft when they went to the quarterfinals. Mark thought it was funny because they almost missed a turn on the mountain road." This new piece of information fit perfectly into the timeline Jack was constructing. "I need to find a way to prove it. But with this," he gestured to the ankle monitor, "I can't even leave the property." "Maybe you don't have to," Carl suggested, reaching for his phone. "My buddy works for the county records office. If maintenance logs exist, he might be able to find copies." Jack spent the afternoon continuing his investigation, adding Carl's information to his timeline. The more he examined the evidence, the more convinced he became that the bus's mechanical failure wasn't just negligence, but part of a deliberate cover-up that had cost 16 young lives. As darkness fell, Jack found himself drawn again to Ryan's room. He sat on the edge of the bed, touching the faded comforter, remembering how Ryan would never make his bed properly, always in a rush to get to practice. The familiar ache of loss squeezed his chest. But something was different now. The pain felt cleaner, more honest. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't listen to what you asked in your letter. I shut everyone out, including your mom. I thought I was honoring your memory, but I was just hiding." Jack pulled out his phone, staring at Emily's contact information. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he couldn't bring himself to press it. What would he say after all these years? That he was finally ready to talk? That he regretted pushing her away when they should have grieved together? Instead, he drafted a text message. I read Ryan's letter. He wanted us to find our way back to each other. I'm sorry I made that impossible. His finger hovered over the send button for a long moment before he deleted the message. Words on a screen weren't enough. Ryan deserved better. Emily deserved better. A notification sound from downstairs interrupted his thoughts. One of the security cameras he'd installed had detected movement. Jack hurried down to check the monitor he'd set up in the kitchen, expecting to see another break-in attempt. Instead, he saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of his property, just beyond the range of his house arrest perimeter. Through the window, embaçada pela chuva que começa a cair, Jack vê Emily saindo de carro estacionado no final de sua entrada, hesitante, como se debatendo consigo mesma sobre se deve avançar ou recuar. Jack stood frozen at the window, watching Emily hesitate in the rain. The water streaked down the glass, distorting her figure, but he would recognize her anywhere, even after all these years. Her blonde hair was darker now, dampened by the steady rainfall, and she hugged herself against the chill, seemingly caught between approaching the house and retreating to her car. Taking a deep breath, Jack opened the front door. The sound of rain intensified, filling the silence between them. Emily looked up, their eyes meeting across the distance. For a long moment, neither moved, as if crossing that space required more courage than either possessed. Finally, Emily stepped forward, each footfall in the mud bringing her closer to the home they had once shared. Jack remained in the doorway, acutely aware of the ankle monitor weighing him down, a physical manifestation of all the barriers between them. "I heard what happened," Emily said when she reached the porch steps, her voice barely audible above the rainfall. "The house arrest, the fight at the rink." Jack nodded silently, unable to find words now that she stood before him. Emily had aged gracefully, a few more lines around her eyes, a maturity to her features that hadn't been there when she left. She looked composed, put together in a way that made Jack suddenly conscious of his bruised face and rumpled clothes. "Are you going to invite me in? Or should I stand in the rain all night?" There was a hint of the old Emily in that question, direct, uncompromising. Jack stepped aside, allowing her to enter the house that had once been their shared home. Emily paused in the entryway, her eyes taking in the changes, and the many things that remained unchanged, preserved in time like artifacts in a museum. "You kept everything the same," she observed, moving into the living room where framed photos of Ryan still dominated the mantelpiece. "Not everything," Jack replied, gesturing to his investigation wall. "I've been busy." Emily approached the collection of newspaper clippings and string connections, studying it with a furrowed brow. "What is all this?" "The truth, or at least what I can piece together of it." Jack stood beside her, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her perfume. She still wore the same one. Michael Bennett falsified the maintenance records for the bus. He admitted it, to me. Emily's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of her shock. She reached out, touching a newspaper clipping about the search being redirected. "You think he deliberately covered it up?" "I know he did. He tore pages from the diary, pages that mentioned problems with the bus brakes before the trip." Jack ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "He had the diary the whole time. It's gone now, stolen from my barn last night." Emily turned to face him, her expression a complex mixture of anger and determination that Jack remembered well from their years together. It was the look she'd worn when fighting for Ryan's place on the team, when challenging doctors during his childhood illnesses, when confronting any injustice head-on. "Tell me everything," she said, removing her rain-soaked jacket. In the kitchen, over cups of strong coffee, Jack explained his discoveries, the diary's contents, Michael's confession in the police cruiser, the evidence of a redirected search. Emily listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her mind working through the implications. "I think some of them might have survived longer if the search had been focused in the right area," Jack finished, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. The diary said they lived for weeks, Emily. Weeks. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she set down her mug. And the letters. You said Ryan wrote to us both. Jack hesitated, then stood. I'll show you. He retrieved a copy of Ryan's letter from a locked drawer in his desk. He had made photocopies after Jason returned the original, fearing something might happen to it. He handed the pages to Emily, watching as she read their son's final words. Her composure cracked as she read, tears welling and then silently tracking down her cheeks. When she reached the part about finding their way back to each other, a small sound escaped her. Half sob, half laugh. "Oh, Ryan," she whispered, touching the paper as if it might somehow connect her, physically, to their son. Always trying to fix things. He was right, Jack admitted, the words difficult after so many years of silence. I pushed you away when we needed each other most. I didn't know how to share that kind of pain. Emily looked up, her eyes red but clear. I couldn't stay and watch you disappear into yourself, Jack. Every day you were less and less present, until you were just a ghost haunting this house alongside Ryan's memory. The truth of her words struck Jack with physical force. He had become a ghost, not living, merely existing in the space between memory and grief. An unexpected knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Jack opened it to find Carl standing on the porch, his expression urgent, clutching a manila envelope. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Emily. But I got those documents we talked about. Thought you'd want to see them right away. Jack invited him in, making quick introductions. Emily, this is Carl Peterson, my neighbor. Carl, this is Emily, my ex-wife. Ryan's mother, Emily corrected gently, extending her hand. Jack's been telling me about your help. Carl placed the envelope on the kitchen table, opening it to reveal photocopied maintenance logs. These are from the county archives. My buddy risked his job getting these for us. The three of them pored over the documents, which clearly showed a pattern of deferred maintenance on the school district's vehicles, including the bus that had carried the Blue Eagles. Most damning was a work order flagging the brake system for urgent repairs, signed by Michael Bennett, and marked, postponed due to budget constraints. The date on this is 3 days before the championship trip, Emily noted, her finger tracing the signature. He knew the bus wasn't safe and let them take it anyway. And then covered it up when they disappeared, Jack added, the final pieces clicking into place. Redirected the search, destroyed evidence, built his career on the sympathy the case generated. Carl shook his head in disgust. The whole town trusted him. He led the memorial services every year. Emily stood abruptly, determination hardening her features. We need to take this to the state police. This can't go through local channels. Michael controls everything here. I can't leave, Jack reminded her, gesturing to his ankle monitor. 500 feet, remember? I'll go, Emily declared. First thing tomorrow morning. Carl cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. While I was at the county office, I heard them talking about the search area where the bus supposedly went missing. That old logging road? It doesn't appear on modern maps because it was decommissioned after a landslide 20 years ago, but it's on the original survey maps. Jack's pulse quickened. Could you find it on a topographical map? Carl nodded, retrieving more papers from his envelope, detailed survey maps of the county's northern mountain range. It's somewhere in this area. The ravine would be steep, probably hidden by tree coverage. Jack studied the maps intensely, comparing them with the descriptions from the coach's diary that he'd committed to memory. He marked a location with a red pen. Here, this has to be it. The diary mentioned a sharp bend, followed by a drop that wasn't visible until they were already on it. Emily leaned closer. Even if you're right, what good does it do us now? After 12 years. Because the truth matters, Jack said firmly. Because those families deserve to know what really happened to their sons. And because... He paused, swallowing hard. Because I need to finish what Ryan started. He tried to be brave until the end. I need to be brave now. Later that night, after Carl had left and Emily had settled into the guest room, Jack sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the maps and documents spread across the table. A plan was forming in his mind, dangerous, potentially illegal, but necessary. The sound of soft footsteps announced Emily's presence. She had changed into an old t-shirt of his, looking both familiar and like a stranger in his home. "I know that look," she said, sitting across from him. "You're planning something stupid." Jack couldn't help but smile slightly. "You always could read me." "What are you thinking, Jack?" He traced the route on the map with his finger. "I need to go there, to the crash site. If we can find physical evidence, the bus, the brake assembly, anything, we'll have proof of what Michael did." Emily's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "You're under house arrest. If you cut that monitor, they'll add felony charges." "Some things are worth the risk." Jack looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "I have to do this, Emily. For Ryan. For all of them." "There has to be another way," she insisted. "Let me take the maintenance records to the state police first. Let the system work." "The system has failed for 12 years, Jack countered. "And Michael will bury these records the moment he realizes they exist. We need something indisputable. Physical evidence from the crash site." A heavy silence fell between them, filled with years of separation and the echoes of shared grief. Finally, Emily reached across the table, placing her hand over his, the first physical contact they had shared in years. "Our marriage couldn't survive losing Ryan," she said softly. "I won't lose you, too." The simple touch of her hand sent a jolt through Jack, a connection he had denied himself for too long. Ryan's words echoed in his mind. "Find your way back to each other." "I never stopped loving you," Jack admitted, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise her. "I just didn't know how to love anyone after Ryan died, not even myself." Emily's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I built a new life, Jack. It's not perfect, but it's stable. My husband is a good man." Jack nodded, accepting. The gentle rejection. "I understand. I'm not asking for anything, but I need to do this, Emily. I need to find where our son died." Emily withdrew her hand slowly. "Then I'm coming with you." "You can't," Jack protested. "Your life, your husband." "Ryan was my son too," she interrupted firmly. "Whatever you find out there, I deserve to see it as much as you do." Jack recognized the determination in her expression, the same stubborn resolve that had first attracted him to her decades ago. He knew better than to argue. "I need to make preparations," he said, already calculating what they would need. "Maps, supplies, equipment to cut the monitor. It's mountainous terrain, dangerous in winter." Emily stood, a new purpose in her movement. "Make your list. I'll get whatever we need tomorrow." As she turned to leave, Jack called after her. "Emily, thank you for coming back, even just for this." She paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the hall light. "I'm not doing this for you, Jack," she said softly. "But maybe Ryan was right about one thing. Maybe we do need each other to get through this." After she had gone, Jack returned to the maps, planning their route to the ravine. His gaze fell on the maintenance records, evidence of negligence and cover-up that had cost 16 young lives. With newfound clarity, he wrote a letter addressing the Blue Eagles families, explaining everything he had discovered and his plan to find the truth. "I can't ask you to come with me," Jack said, placing the sealed envelope on the table where Emily would find it. "But I need you to do something. Deliver this to all the families." He pushed toward her a thick envelope containing copies of the letters from all the boys. Emily held the thick envelope in her hands, her eyes moving from the package to Jack's determined face. "You know I'll deliver these," she said. "But I'm not letting you go alone, Jack. Not this time." In the pre-dawn darkness, Jack made his final preparations. He'd spent the night gathering supplies, heavy winter clothing, emergency rations, first aid supplies, climbing equipment, and most importantly, the original diary that he'd managed to hide in a hollowed-out book before Michael's men had searched the house. Emily had returned from town with waterproof bags, additional flashlights, and a small saw perfect for removing the ankle monitor. Jack checked his watch, 4:30 a.m. The early hour would give them maximum darkness for their escape and several hours head start before anyone would notice his absence. "Ready?" Emily asked, entering the kitchen dressed in thermal layers, her old hiking boots laced tightly. Jack nodded, pulling up his pant leg to reveal the monitoring device. "Once I cut this, we'll have about 2 minutes before the signal interruption registers at the sheriff's office. The car needs to be out of the driveway by then." Emily knelt with the saw, her hands steady as she positioned it against the plastic band. "Just like old times," she said with a grim smile. "Remember when we broke into the school pool that summer?" The memory, so distant it felt like another life, brought a fleeting smile to Jack's face. "You were always the troublemaker." "And you were always right behind me," she countered, beginning to saw through the plastic. The monitor came apart with a clean snap. Jack quickly gathered their backpacks while Emily started the car. They pulled away from the farmhouse 60 seconds later, headlights off until they reached the main road. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror at the dark silhouette of the home where he'd imprisoned himself for 12 years. They drove east as the first hints of gray touched the horizon, following back roads to avoid potential encounters with early morning patrol cars. Emily navigated using the topographical maps spread across her lap, directing Jack toward the mountainous region where the bus had disappeared. "The road should narrow up ahead," she said, squinting at the map in the growing dawn light. "Turn north when you see the old lumber mill sign." Jack gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with possibilities and dangers. If Michael discovered their absence before they reached the ravine, he might send deputies to intercept them. If they did find the crash site, there was no guarantee that evidence would have survived 12 years of exposure to the elements. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the paved road gave way to gravel, then to little more than a rutted forest track. Pine trees closed in around them, branches heavy with fresh snow from the night's precipitation. "This is as far as we can drive," Jack announced, stopping where fallen trees blocked the narrow path. "We'll have to continue on foot." They shouldered their backpacks in silence, the weight settling uncomfortably after years without serious hiking. The morning air bit through their layers, their breath forming clouds in the cold. Jack consulted his compass, then pointed to a game trail leading deeper into the forest. According to the diary, they were following the ridgeline when they missed the turn. That should be about 2 miles northeast of here. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as they hiked, steep inclines giving way to treacherous descents, patches of ice hidden beneath the fresh snow. In some places, they had to forge their own path through dense underbrush. Despite the cold, sweat soaked their inner layers. Thomas wrote that they could see 3 mountain peaks from the road before the accident, Jack said as they paused to catch their breath on a rocky outcrop. "From this height, we should be able to... there." He pointed to a distant clearing where the remnants of a road cut through the forest like a scar. 3 distinctive peaks rose behind it, matching the description from the diary. Emily shielded her eyes against the morning sun. That must be where they went off. Their pace quickened despite burning muscles and aching feet. As they approached the abandoned road, Jack felt an inexplicable sense of dread growing within him. This forgotten stretch of pavement had been the last place his son had been conscious of his surroundings before plunging into the ravine. The road itself was barely recognizable after 12 years of neglect, cracked asphalt reclaimed by nature, trees growing through the surface in places. They followed its winding path until reaching a sharp curve, the exact type of blind turn that could hide a deadly drop. "This is it," Jack breathed, approaching the crumbling edge of the road. Below, a steep ravine plunged several hundred feet, its sides nearly vertical in places. Winter had stripped the deciduous trees of their leaves, revealing glimpses of the ravine floor below. "How do we get down there?" Emily asked, peering over the edge with apprehension. Jack unclipped the coil of climbing rope from his backpack. Very carefully. Securing the rope to a sturdy tree, Jack prepared for the descent. He tested the knots twice before approaching Emily. "I'll go first. Once I'm secure at the bottom, I'll signal for you to follow." Emily caught his arm. "Be careful, Jack. We've come too far to lose you now." The descent was grueling, the rope burning through Jack's gloves as he navigated the nearly vertical drop. Loose rocks dislodged beneath his feet, clattering dangerously down the ravine. Halfway down, his foot slipped on a patch of ice, leaving him dangling momentarily before he regained his footing, heart hammering in his chest. Above, Emily called out in alarm. "Jack!" "I'm okay," he shouted back, though his shaking limbs suggested otherwise. "Just a slip." When he finally reached the ravine floor, Jack signaled for Emily to follow, positioning himself to spot her descent. She moved with surprising agility, having retained the skills from their hiking days early in their marriage. The ravine floor was dark and cold, the winter sun unable to fully penetrate the narrow space. Jack switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal a landscape of tumbled boulders, fallen trees, and accumulated debris from years of runoff. "If the bus came down here, where would it have ended up?" Emily asked, her voice hushed in the oppressive quiet of the ravine. Jack consulted the diary. Thomas wrote that they slid for what felt like forever before hitting something solid. The bus stayed upright initially, but they couldn't open the doors. They eventually escaped through the emergency hatch. They began to follow the natural drainage of the ravine, climbing over obstacles and squeezing through narrow passages. The air grew noticeably colder as they progressed, the walls closing in around them. "Jack, look," Emily said suddenly, pointing her flashlight at a splash of faded yellow on a boulder, paint that matched the school district's buses. Their pace quickened, adrenaline overriding exhaustion. More evidence appeared. Shards of safety glass embedded in the soil, a twisted piece of metal that might have been part of a seat frame, a tattered remnant of what could have been a team banner. The ravine widened into a small clearing, and there it was. The front section of a school bus, partially submerged in a pool of dark water, the rest of the vehicle crushed beneath massive boulders that had fallen in the years since the accident. Nature had reclaimed much of the wreckage, with moss growing over the exposed metal and saplings sprouting through broken windows. Jack stood frozen, staring at the final resting place of the Blue Eagles. Somewhere in that twisted metal, Ryan had spent his last days, writing his final words to his parents. "My God," Emily whispered, her hand finding Jack's and gripping it tightly. They approached the wreckage slowly, as if afraid to disturb a gravesite. The water surrounding the bus section was ice-cold and stagnant, fed by mountain runoff, but with no visible outlet. Jack knelt at the edge, sweeping his flashlight across the submerged portions of the vehicle. "There," he said, pointing to what remained of the driver's area. The brake assembly might still be intact. Using a fallen branch, Jack probed the water's depth, about 4 feet at its deepest point. Cold enough to preserve evidence, but not so deep that they couldn't reach it. "I'm going in," he decided, already removing his outer jacket. "Jack, that water's freezing. You'll get hypothermia." "I'll be quick," he promised, stripping down to his thermal layer. "Keep the flashlight trained on the bus." The cold was shocking, stealing his breath as he waded into the murky water. Each step sent clouds of silt billowing upward, temporarily obscuring his vision. The metal of the bus was slippery with algae, sharp in places where it had torn during the crash. Jack ducked under the surface, feeling along the driver's area for the brake pedal and its connecting mechanisms. His lungs burned for air by the time his fingers closed around what he sought, a maintenance tag, still attached to the brake line, preserved by the cold water and lack of oxygen. He surfaced with a gasp, the waterproof tag clutched triumphantly in his hand. Back on shore, shivering violently as Emily helped him into dry clothes, Jack examined their prize. The tag was faded but legible, a maintenance request noting critical brake system failure and bearing Michael Bennett's signature authorizing the bus for use despite the warning. "This proves it," Jack said through chattering teeth. He knew the bus wasn't safe. Their exploration of the crash site revealed more evidence of the boys' ordeal. They found the cave Thomas had described in his diary, a natural formation further along the ravine where the team had sought shelter. Inside, 12 years of weather had erased many signs of habitation, but not all. Initials carved into the stone walls, the remnants of makeshift beds constructed from bus seats, a rudimentary fire pit where they had tried to keep warm. And in a small protected alcove, Jack found a rusted metal box, the kind used for first aid supplies, sealed against the elements. Inside lay a second, smaller notebook, its pages remarkably preserved. "It's Thomas's handwriting," Jack confirmed, carefully turning the brittle pages. Another diary he must have started when the first one filled up. As they sat in the cave's entrance, Jack reading excerpts aloud, the distant sound of helicopters echoed through the ravine. The search had begun sooner than they'd anticipated. "They know we're missing," Emily said, anxiety tinging her voice. Jack continued reading, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Emily, this changes everything. According to this, some of the boys survived for nearly a month. Their injuries were minor. They died of exposure and dehydration while waiting for a rescue that was searching in the wrong area, the area Michael directed them to." The helicopter sounds grew closer, searchlights visible now through the trees above the ravine. Jack carefully placed the second diary and the brake tag in a waterproof bag. "We need to find a way out that doesn't involve climbing back up where we came down," he said, studying the ravine's formations. "There must be another way." As they gathered their evidence and prepared to move deeper into the ravine to avoid detection, the water level around the bus began to rise slowly, melting snow from higher elevations, feeding into their enclosed space. Preso na caverna escura com a água gelada subindo lentamente ao seu redor, Jack encontra último item. Uma pequena caixa metálica contendo diário secundário do treinador, com informações que mudariam completamente a história conhecida sobre os últimos dias dos Blue Eagles. Jack's trembling fingers pried open the small metal box as the freezing water continued rising around his waist. Inside, protected by watertight seals, lay a second diary from Coach Thomas, smaller than the first, its pages filled with cramped, desperate handwriting that documented the team's final days in meticulous detail. "Emily," he called, his voice echoing in the cave. "We need to get higher ground. Now." Emily splashed through the rising water toward him, her face pale in the beam of their flashlight. "The entrance is already flooding. We're trapped." Jack clutched the diary against his chest, scanning the cave walls for any possible escape route. The helicopter searchlights filtered through cracks in the cave ceiling, casting eerie, dancing patterns on the rising water. "There must be another way out," Jack insisted, directing his flashlight upward. "Animals use these caves. There has to be a ventilation shaft or another passage." The cold was becoming unbearable, their lower bodies numbed by the glacial water. Jack waded toward the back of the cave, where the roof sloped higher above the waterline. As Emily followed, she stumbled against an underwater obstacle, nearly falling beneath the surface. "What was that?" she gasped, regaining her balance. Jack directed his light downward, revealing the grim outline of what appeared to be a backpack, preserved by the cold water all these years. He couldn't bring himself to check if remains might be attached to it. "Keep moving," he urged, pushing the thought aside. While Emily held the flashlight, Jack opened the second diary, reading frantically as they retreated from the rising water. The entries painted a devastating picture. The boys had initially survived with minor injuries, rationing food and melting snow for water. Coach Thomas had organized them into teams for survival, maintaining discipline and hope. "Listen to this," Jack said, his voice breaking. Day 17. Ryan continues to lead morale efforts, organizing hockey drills on dry land to keep the younger boys active. His father's training has made him remarkably resilient. "If rescue doesn't come soon, I fear the cold will take the weakest first." Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, tears mingling with the water droplets on her face. They were alive for weeks after the crash. Jack turned more pages, his hands shaking not just from cold, but from mounting anger. Day 23. Heard helicopters today, but they were searching the southern valley, nowhere near our position. The boys waved jackets, used mirrors, anything to signal. Nothing worked. Morale is deteriorating rapidly. "The southern valley," Emily repeated, "where Michael redirected the search teams." The implications were staggering. Michael hadn't just covered up mechanical negligence. His actions had actively prevented rescue teams from finding survivors. What had been a tragic accident was now something far more sinister. The water continued rising inexorably, now reaching their chests as they pressed against the back wall of the cave. Jack directed his flashlight toward the ceiling once more, desperately seeking any opening. "There!" Emily pointed to a narrow crack about 7 feet above the current water level, where a faint draft disturbed dust particles in their flashlight beam. "Air is moving through there." Jack handed her the diaries and documents, securing them in the waterproof bag. "I'll boost you up. See if you can widen that opening." With Jack's hands locked together forming a step, Emily climbed onto his shoulders, reaching for the crack in the ceiling. Loose rocks came away in her hands as she clawed at the opening. "It's widening," she called down. "I can feel a larger space beyond." The water rose to Jack's shoulders as he maintained his position, Emily now standing precariously on him. Rock by rock, she enlarged the opening until it was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "I think I can fit," she said, pulling herself up with straining muscles. "There's a tunnel beyond. It slopes upward." Once Emily had wriggled through the opening, she reached back to help Jack climb up. The passage beyond was cramped and muddy, clearly formed by water runoff and likely used by animals seeking shelter. They crawled on hands and knees, the space sometimes narrowing until they had to squeeze through on their stomachs. After what felt like an eternity of claustrophobic crawling, Emily, who led the way, suddenly stopped. "I feel air movement, stronger now." The tunnel widened slightly before ending at a small opening partially covered by roots and vegetation. Pushing through, they emerged onto a steep, wooded slope, the fresh air a shock after the stale confines of the cave. Above them, helicopter searchlights swept the forest, their mechanical thrum echoing across the valley. Jack and Emily pressed themselves against the ground, avoiding detection as they caught their breath. "We need to get back to civilization," Jack said, consulting their map with shaking hands. "But not to Lakefield. We need to reach the state police directly." Emily nodded, checking the waterproof bag containing their evidence. "Everything's still intact. The second diary, the maintenance tag, all of it." They oriented themselves using the distant mountain peaks, determining they were now on the eastern slope of the ravine, perhaps 5 miles from the nearest access road. With renewed determination despite their exhaustion, they began their trek through the dense forest. The journey was grueling. Both were soaked, cold, and approaching exhaustion. The terrain proved treacherous, with hidden sinkholes and fallen logs blocking their path. At one point, Jack slipped on a moss-covered rock, tumbling several feet down an embankment before Emily managed to grab his arm. "We need to rest," she insisted after pulling him to safety. "Just for a few minutes." Huddled beneath the shelter of a large pine, they shared the last of their energy bars, the sugar providing temporary relief from their fatigue. Jack continued reading the second diary by flashlight, each entry further damning Michael's actions. The last entry is dated 32 days after the crash, Jack said quietly. Thomas knew they were running out of time. He wrote, "I've instructed each boy to write final messages to their families. Some are too weak now to hold a pen. Ryan Miller has taken it upon himself to transcribe for them. I believe he will be among the last survivors thanks to his father's conditioning. If anyone finds this, please tell the families we never stopped believing rescue would come." Emily leaned against Jack, quiet tears streaming down her face. "They were waiting for us, Jack, all that time." And Michael knew exactly where to look, Jack finished grimly. He redirected the search deliberately. By dawn, they had reached the access road, their bodies pushed beyond normal endurance. Luck finally turned in their favor when a logging truck approached, the driver stopping to help the bedraggled pair. "You folks look half dead," the grizzled driver observed, ushering them into his heated cab. "Hospital's the nearest place with a phone, about 20 miles east. That where you want to go?" "The state police barracks," Jack corrected. "It's on the way to the hospital. We have evidence about the Blue Eagles bus crash." The driver's eyebrows shot up. "That hockey team that went missing years back? My nephew went to school with those boys." At the state police barracks, Jack and Emily were initially met with skepticism. Two exhausted, filthy individuals claiming to have found evidence about a 12-year-old case. But when Jack produced the maintenance tag and the second diary, the desk sergeant's demeanor changed immediately. "Wait here," he ordered, disappearing into an office. Minutes later, they were ushered into an interview room, where two senior officers listened intently to their story. Jack handed over the original maintenance tag, still damp from the submerged bus. "This proves Sheriff Bennett knew the bus had critical brake issues before it departed," he explained. "And the second diary shows that survivors lasted for weeks after the crash, during which time Bennett deliberately misdirected search efforts away from their location." The officers exchanged alarmed glances. "These are serious accusations against a sitting sheriff," one said cautiously. "The evidence speaks for itself," Emily replied firmly. 16 boys and their coach died because Michael Bennett covered up his negligence. We can take you to the crash site, show you exactly where the bus is." While state troopers were dispatched to secure the crash site, Jack and Emily were taken to the hospital for treatment. Doctors diagnosed them with mild hypothermia and exhaustion, insisting they remain under observation. From his hospital bed, Jack gave his formal statement to state investigators, detailing everything from finding the uniforms to discovering the crash site. Emily sat beside him, filling in details and providing supporting testimony. "We've issued a warrant for Sheriff Bennett's arrest," the lead investigator informed them. "And we've retrieved the bus's brake assembly. Our forensic team confirms it shows signs of catastrophic failure that should have been addressed before the vehicle was cleared for use." Jack leaned back against his pillows, a complex mixture of vindication and grief washing over him. "What about the families? Do they know?" "They've been notified about the discovery of the crash site," the investigator confirmed, "but not all the details yet. We wanted to verify your findings first." The door to Jack's hospital room opened, revealing a familiar face, Emily's sister Karen, her expression a mixture of relief and worry. "The nurses said I'd find you here," Karen said, rushing to Emily's side. "When you didn't check out of the hotel, I called Jack's house and got no answer. I've been frantic." Emily embraced her sister, then turned to Jack. "Karen brought me copies of the boys' letters. I had them in my hotel room." "The families have read them," Karen confirmed. "Every single one. They're grateful, Jack, even after everything. They're grateful to finally have those final words." As Karen and Emily stepped outside to speak privately, Jack's phone buzzed with a message, a formal document from the county courthouse. His monitoring violation charges had been suspended pending investigation of Michael Bennett, and he'd been granted special permission to attend the rescheduled Blue Eagles memorial service the following week. In the silence of his hospital room, Jack held the official notice in hands, still raw from his climb out of the ravine. Wondering what he would say to the families who had once held him responsible for withholding their son's last words. Now, a different but equally painful truth would face them all. No one in his lonely hospital room saw the small envelope. The exhausted man opened next. His sentence would be announced immediately after the memorial, determining whether he would face imprisonment for his actions or if the extraordinary circumstances would be considered mitigating factors by the court. Jack tore open the court envelope, his hands still trembling from the trauma of the ravine. The official letterhead of the county courthouse stared back at him, bearing unexpected news. In light of his cooperation with the state investigation, Jack had been sentenced to 300 hours of community service rather than incarceration. The judge had recognized the extraordinary circumstances and his role in uncovering the truth. Exhaling slowly, Jack placed the document on his hospital bedside table and leaned back against the pillows. The memorial service was only 2 days away. On the morning of the rescheduled Blue Eagles memorial, a light snow fell over Lakefield. Jack stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie he hadn't worn in years. The bruises on his face had faded to yellowish shadows, physical reminders of a confrontation that now seemed trivial compared to what they had discovered. From the guest room, he heard Emily moving about, preparing for the day ahead. The drive to the renovated hockey rink was silent, both Jack and Emily lost in their own thoughts. 12 years had passed since the last time they had attended any event together. As Jack parked among the rows of vehicles already filling the lot, he noted the absence of Michael Bennett's sheriff's cruiser. The man was now in custody awaiting trial, his career and reputation destroyed by the evidence Jack and Emily had recovered. "Are you ready for this?" Emily asked, her hand briefly touching his arm. Jack nodded, unable to find adequate words. They walked side by side into the building where generations of Lakefield children had learned to skate, where Ryan had spent countless hours perfecting his goaltending skills. Inside, the renovation was immediately apparent. Fresh paint, new bleachers, and memorial plaques lined the walls. But most striking was the arrangement at center ice. 17 Blue Eagles uniforms laid out in a perfect circle, each accompanied by a framed photograph of its owner. In the years since the disappearance, the ice had been renamed Eagles Rink, but today it served a more solemn purpose. A hush fell over the gathered crowd as Jack entered. Families, teammates, and community members who had once looked at him with suspicion now watched with a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude, sorrow, and lingering traces of resentment. Jack felt their eyes tracking his movement as he made his way toward the assembled seats. Sarah Williams was the first to approach him. The coach's widow stood stiffly, her face lined with grief, but her eyes clear. For a moment, Jack feared another confrontation, but instead, she extended her hand. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd, "for finding Thomas, for bringing him home." Jack accepted her handshake, the small gesture somehow more meaningful than any elaborate reconciliation. "He never gave up on those boys," he replied, "right until the end." Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes before she turned away. One by one, other family members approached Jack. Some merely nodded acknowledgement, others offered handshakes or brief words of thanks. The shared grief that had divided them now created a fragile bond of understanding. Jason Parker made his way through the crowd, his expression solemn as he approached Jack. Without speaking, he removed a folded paper from his pocket, the original letter from Ryan that he had stolen from Jack's barn. He placed it gently in Jack's hand. "I had no right to take this," Jason said, echoing his earlier words, but with deeper meaning now. "I read it. We all did wrong things because we were hurting." Jack accepted the letter, placing it carefully in his inside jacket pocket, close to his heart. "We all did," he agreed quietly. The memorial service began with the mayor's brief remarks, followed by a somber procession of the families. Each placed personal items alongside their son's uniform. Photographs, favorite books, hockey cards, mementos of lives cut tragically short. The recovery teams had begun retrieving remains from the crash site, but those would be handled with privacy in the coming weeks. Today was about honoring memories. When Jack's turn came to address the gathering, he approached the microphone with trepidation. The speech he had prepared seemed inadequate in the face of the collective grief filling the arena. 12 years ago, he began hesitantly, we lost 17 members of our community. For 12 years, I've lived in isolation, believing that was how I honored my son's memory. Jack paused, searching for the right words. I was wrong. Ryan's final request was that I not live alone in my grief. It took me too long to understand what he meant. From the corner of his eye, Jack saw Emily watching him intently, her presence giving him strength to continue. I apologize to every family here for my selfishness in keeping your son's final words from you, even briefly. I thought I was protecting Ryan's memory, but I was really protecting myself from having to share his loss. Jack's voice grew steadier as he spoke. In the cave where they spent their final days, those boys showed more courage and compassion than many of us have managed in the years since. They took care of each other. They never gave up hope that we would find them. A respectful silence filled the arena, broken only by muffled sobs from various corners. I've decided to sell the eastern portion of my farm, Jack continued. His announcement meeting surprised murmurs. The proceeds will establish the Blue Eagles Foundation, dedicated to building a training center that will teach young athletes winter survival skills and proper safety protocols. He looked around at the assembled faces. We couldn't save our sons, but perhaps their legacy can save others. After the formal ceremony concluded, families lingered around the displayed uniforms, sharing stories and memories. Emily stood apart, observing the interaction with a bittersweet smile. Jack made his way toward her through the dispersing crowd. That was a good speech, she said as he reached her side. I meant every word, Jack replied. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the last of the attendees filed out of the arena. Soon, only Jack and Emily remained, sitting side by side in the empty bleachers, looking out at the 17 uniforms still arranged on the ice. I'm flying back tomorrow, Emily said, breaking the silence. David is expecting me. Jack nodded, accepting the reminder of her husband without the jealousy he might have felt weeks earlier. Thank you for coming, for helping me find them. Ryan was my son too, she replied simply. The maintenance staff had begun their work, carefully collecting the memorial items for proper storage until the permanent display could be completed. Fresh snow fell gently through the open doors, dusting the blue uniforms with a delicate white layer. You know what Ryan would say about all this? Emily asked, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Jack considered the question, thinking about his son's determination, his humor, his unfailing ability to see the best in difficult situations. That I finally learned to play as part of a team, he answered, feeling the truth of the words as they left his mouth. Emily nodded, her hand finding his briefly before withdrawing. They weren't the same people who had married all those years ago. Their paths had diverged too significantly to simply reconnect as if nothing had changed. But in this moment, they shared something profound. Not just memories of their son, but a hard-won peace that had eluded them both for 12 years. As they watched, the snowflakes continued their gentle descent, each crystal unique and perfect in its brief journey. The white powder accumulated on the blue fabric of the uniforms, no longer buried by time or fear or human failing, but visible for all to see and remember, Just as the truth had finally emerged from its long concealment, so too had Jack emerged from his self-imposed isolation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The formal opening of the state's case against Michael Bennett, the long process of properly laying the Blue Eagles to rest, the beginning of Jack's community service. The Blue Eagles Foundation would require planning and organization. The farm would need attention after his absence. But for now, in this moment of shared silence with Emily, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in 12 years. Not happiness, precisely, but a sense of purpose. Ryan's last wish had been for his parents to find their way back to each other. Perhaps they had, though not in the way their son might have imagined. They had found their way back to being parents together, united in their love for a boy who had shown courage until the end. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Lakefield in a clean white blanket that seemed to promise new beginnings. Inside the rink, two parents sat in peaceful silence, watching as the gentle snowflakes covered the 17 blue uniforms displayed on the ice, honoring memories that would never again be buried by time.